Here we are. I'm going to admit a bunch of people. This is going to be fun. Another person. Hi there, Nancy. Good to see you.
Good to see
I'm just monitoring all our participants. We have started the recording. I'm loving this. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're showing up for this. I'm just monitoring, making sure we have all the participants. We are currently recording. I am going to get us started because I want us to be on time. And I will just share some of the what I call the good information, like who the heck is this woman? Hi, everyone. I'm Jeannie Doherty. And a lot of times what happens is my clients call me a money whisperer. And why is that? Because I help them with ease and wisdom, so they get out of money burnout and they can do more than just trying to control their finances. I help them make their money work for them. And, I help them lose their financial stress and shatter their own glass ceilings. And I'm also the founder of the Virtual Caregiver Conference because both of my parents passed away from Alzheimer's. And so doing these webinars is part of my passion project. It's giving back. And I remember very clearly feeling very isolated and invisible when I was a caregiver. So I want to give to you guys the best information I can find, the best tools and resources. And I'm very excited to say I have Marnie Blank here today. She is the founder of Begin with the End. Her services are particularly curated for individuals and families. So, when they got to deal with the logistics and the emotional aspects of death, dying, and grief, which is enormously life-changing. She's trained as an end-of-life doula. She's a mediator and after-loss consultant. She's also a recovering lawyer. Although I would like to say I feel like we need a lot of good lawyers, but I'm okay that you decided to become a death doula. And she's female-founded business owner and a lifelong learner at heart. She lives in Brooklyn and she serves her clients throughout the US. So, Marnie, I am so excited to have you here, and I'm just bringing in more people.
Thanks for having me here. I always love the programs that you're putting on, especially for the caregivers.
Yes, yes. And Marnie and I chatted a little bit before, and we said we'll try to hold all questions to the end. However, I know people are sometimes urgent and they need an answer now. So definitely, no worries. I'll be monitoring the chat. So, Marnie, would you like to kind of get us started? Like, can you explain what a death doula is? Because I hear all kinds of different definitions, and I know when I talk to people in the caregiving space, they don't always know. So, could you start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a death doula or end of life doula, they sort of are interchangeable, depending on how you feel about the word death. And we are non-medical professionals who deal with the emotional, the practical, and the spiritual aspects of death, dying, and grief. So this can look like what you might think of as a traditional death doula, sitting bedside with those who are actively dying at the end and being a support for the person who is dying and the loved ones. It can be active listening, like a lot of people at the end don't want to be a burden, and so don't want to share things like fear or regret or sadness or anger, and so how can there be an additional support there to sort of help through that transition? It can also look like respite care for the caregivers and being there to make sure that the person who is traditionally there has space to go take a walk, take a shower, feel supported. And it can be more practical. Like, with some clients, we go through their phone together and make sure that there's a list of all of the important people who need to be contacted after one's died, so that the family doesn't, in a moment of grief, have to figure out who is important or who needs to be contacted. And thinking about sort of end of life issues in general, like dealing with a funeral or memorial, what we want with our body at the end. Traditionally there's been burial or cremation, and there are so many more green options now to consider. So it's really thinking about the emotional, the practical, and a lot of people at the end have a lot of questions about spirituality, and so we're there to talk to people, be curious, ask questions, and just create as warm and loving space as possible for people.
Yeah, that is a lot. And so, of course, I'm gonna just sit there and be like, so what happens when families don't agree about, just the burial process? So whether it's cremation, put them in this plot, that kind of thing. How do you try to, because I always find it as a juicy conversation, not something to fight about, but I do find it is just a juicy conversation. And I'm just curious, as a death doula, have you ever had that experience, and what have you done to kind of like, here's what we want to try to aim for?
With anything else, it's, really important to be having these conversations in advance and trying to get on the same page. Oftentimes, there are family dynamics at play that make it challenging to come to decisions as a family, but that's why starting early, not at the very end stages, is so important for families to be coming together and talking about it, and really incorporating what the individual who's at the end wants. The goal is to be honoring the wishes and the values of the person who is dying. And so when you're able to have these mediated conversations or facilitated conversations with, the parent, the elder, whoever it is, and making sure that you really know what is going on, it's more likely that the family members will fall in line if they hear from the horse's mouth that this is what I want, this is what is important to me. It's more likely than if it gets to the end and someone has passed and it's never been discussed, then there's a lot more opportunity for family arguments to come into play and it get really uncomfortable. You can fill out a form basically designating someone to be in charge um, of the funeral or the body disposition. And so if you fill out and sign this that says X person is responsible, that also gives clarity to the family that there is no discussion, that one person has been nominated, and that can also be a way to avoid conflict.
I really like the sensible approach for something like that, because I will just share. I have seen it more than once that somebody is buried in the wrong spot. I mean, it wasn't the identified, plot that they wanted them. They were in the wrong city. Cremation was done. They didn't want cremation. They were buried. They wanted cremation. And I 100% agree with you. You want to have the conversation ahead of time, hopefully when the person's lucid enough. But most importantly, what I've noticed is that when folks have these disagreements, it's because it's not written down. It's not specifically written down. When I die, when I pass. So, because I know in hospitals and medical, facilities, everyone's given an advance directive, but nobody's like, and by the way, please dispose of my body in such and such manner, is not put in a hospital context. It makes sense because hospital isn't really equipped to deal with that. But that is what certain things happen in families, is that they will go to war over this stuff. And I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. Having something written down, and also explained as to like, this is why I'm choosing this. This is why this is important to me, and saying it out loud, can really give space for the family, even if they may not have been on board to begin with, to be like, okay, this is what they want. And I am here to honor that. Obviously, it can get messy. You can't always predict how things will go and how people feel at the end. You could be very much on the same page, and then it sort of at the very end can go sideways. But whether you're getting it on video, whether you are having that conversation directly, or whether you're writing it down, hopefully all three, that's really great. And I think one of the things we're talking about on this call is this the proverbial go bag, but it's really is important to not just have that information written down in your apartment, but having this information digitally stored so that it can be accessible at any point and by the people that need to have access to it, when the time comes for it to be needed.
Yeah, and you make a really good point about digitally accessing. Could you kind of clarify that? Because some people think it's like a PDF they can just email in, and maybe it is. But I also know that when things get very heated and legal, and you know this better than anybody as a former lawyer, that people are looking for the wet signature. They're looking for the original copy, not a digitally altered one. So,
Yeah, and if you've been working with an estate attorney, they should have a copy on file. But again, like who is that person? Do you have the information written down that this is my estate planning attorney, that this is where the information is located? But yes, I mean, typically when people have estate planning or these documents, they keep them hopefully in an organized space in the home, ideally fireproof, and secure, but accessible to the people who need to have access to it when it's available. But I'm always recommending to people that on top of that, that you should be having a digital vault or some sort of organization available online that is secure and safe, so that if something were to happen, that you have access to that. So, Jeannie, how you and I started talking about this conversation was with everything going on in the wildfires in California, people lost everything. And you're not going to be thinking about certain things in the heat of the moment if you are given 30, 45 minutes to evacuate your home. And we're living in an age of climate disasters. So how are you planning in advance for worst case scenario, like not to be a prepper necessarily, just being like, okay, here are the logical things that I can do to prepare in advance. If something were to happen, how do I make sure that my important documents and assets are secure? And so, yes, having that wet copy is important, but having a copy that you upload to the cloud to one of these digital vaults is a really great way. And also providing, if you have an executor named, to provide them with the information, or your healthcare proxy, having them have a copy of that form so that it's not just the keeper of the information, but those that you trust, and I highlight trust, have the information that you need. So some of these online platforms, there's one called Trustworthy that's really great, very user friendly. Everplans is one.
Yeah.
There's one called My Life and Wishes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you're not so digitally savvy, but you still feel like you need it, you can do something like using your Google Drive and password protecting it. Is that the most safe out of everything? No, but is it a step above that you're still able to access it if something were to happen? Yes.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I'm glad you brought up the Google Drive because I find just as a money person, sometimes people go on the cheap, as I say, like, let's spend no money on preserving the documents. And I'm like, it never fails. It's a holiday weekend, it's after hours, and the attorney's on vacation for 3 weeks. And if they're the only one who has a copy of this and this person needs, immediate care now, oh, Snickers.
It's funny that you say that. I was just working with a family in after loss. One of the things I do is help overwhelmed executors and family after a death deal with all the paperwork and logistics. And I was working with a family recently where exactly that. They couldn't find a copy of a will. They couldn't find a copy of the trust. They contacted the attorney who had since left the firm.
Ugh.
She happened to be in Europe for a month and basically said, well, I'll get back to you when I'm back. Like there was no urgency and it held the whole process up. And
Ugh.
so where are you, making sure that whether you're caring for a loved one, making sure that you understand where the documents are, and also making sure that you have those documents in the first place. A lot of people, I mean, only 33% of our adult population have, trusts and wills.
Wills. I know. I know. It's like,
Um,
oh,
and everyone needs them, whether they think that they have a ton of money or not. It's very relative, but it's so important for everyone to be protected, and even more so to have a healthcare proxy and a power of attorney in place, because that affects caring for someone while they're still alive.
excellent point. Excellent point. I'm glad you said that. Marie, can you kind of explain how you work with like family members and sometimes maybe the aging loved one about how you offer the support and how you can be present, especially for these really challenging conversations that we need to have, which is like we need to talk about the fact that maybe somebody's sick or they're getting older, and we want to make sure we get everything to their
Yeah,
specifications. Hmm.
it can be really challenging, but like I said, really important to be having these conversations within families, and sort of understanding where they're at. So, the first thing that I'm looking at is asking where are you in this planning process? What have you done? Because some people have done most of the things and just need some T's and I's dotted and crossed, or some are, saying, I never really thought about this, and I understand that it's important. So meeting people where they are, without judgment, because this is a topic of conversation that's really uncomfortable, and we aren't taught how to have uncomfortable conversations in this family, and really giving them a space to think about these things that, maybe they haven't thought about. Most of us don't want to think about our own death or those of around us, who we don't want to ever die. And so we put off these conversations. So oftentimes, I'll be asking who needs to be part of this conversation. Is this a family conversation where, mom and dad and the adult children are on the call together and we're sort of talking about things together? Or, is it a younger family who may, the kids are not involved, but we have to be thinking about things like guardianship and other, aspects? Or are you a solo ager, by choice or by circumstance? And what does it look like to create a care plan so that as you age, you're aging, safely, and that you have a support network that is, there to guide you and to be a resource? And how are we resourcing you to make sure that, as things progress or change, that you feel, that you are surrounded by people who are going to show up for you, whether those are paid providers or that is your social network? I would share just, for a second.
Yeah, yeah. Go right ahead.
I've created, let's see if I can actually make this happen.
All right. I love this. She's going to make it happen. We
Can I
can
make
see
it?
your screen.
Okay, yes. Do you see? I'm gonna share this. Um,
Yeah, there we
okay,
go.
I'm going back. Okay, so this is something that I've created to sort of help families have conversations. So, sometimes there's going to be a caregiver who is, if there's two sisters in a family, one might live close to mom and dad, or mom, and one might be on the other side of the country. One might be more responsible for the finances of it, and one might be more, hands on deck, checking for caregivers. So one thing that I'm talking about with people is making sure that we're all on the same page. So it can be them filling this out, themselves. This can be a conversation that we're, doing it together. So making sure who, is the decision maker, is it both children? Is it one who is best for that role? And maybe one is, the healthcare proxy and one is power of attorney. Um, Thinking about care preferences. Is this someone who wants to age in place, or is open to moving to a facility as things change? And really, again, having these conversations about what are your wishes and how can we make sure that we are there.
So I want
Um,
to just pause here and go right back to like, where do you want to go? Because
yeah.
I have found this is a very interesting and I'll just say juicy topic with aging loved ones. My experiences, and Marnie, feel free to jump in here, but a lot of aging loved ones think they're fine and they want to stay
Yes.
in place for as long as they possibly can. And they will not entertain when other family members, whether it's a spouse or especially the adult children, say, but what if you need to go to a home? Or what if you have to go to a nursing home? I could go on and on and on. And they won't hear it. So, what I have learned, this has been my experiences, here's when we may have to place you in a home. When medically the doctor says yes for the following reasons, maybe you can't walk around safely in your own place, maybe we've already remodeled it and it's not going to work. There could be an issue like that you can't get consistent caregivers there present in your home, and maybe your family's doing everything they can, but if they're the primary caregiver and they get sick, then what do? You're going to have to hire somebody if you don't have another family member to step in. And I find when you can get more granular in these conversations, and I find when it is literally somebody like you, Marnie, that has to very diplomatically step in and say, I want you to stay here for as long as you possibly can. Here's where it's going to possibly change. This is the stuff we have to plan for. And then the person's like, oh, I see your point, is what I have learned, that they'll be a little more flexible if the doctor says you have to move. Now, you and I both know, Marty, there are stubborn aging loved ones out there that are like, over my dead body. And that's good to know. We want to get that information now, I think, because then it helps, whether you're a healthcare proxy or you're a medical power of attorney, is when they might say they don't appear to be competent to make their own decisions, and that's different. Then you have to step in. But I've seen people kind of go all over the place. Like they don't really want to say, well, what if you fall and break your hip? You might have to be, just in a nursing home or a rehab facility till you can get stronger.
Yeah, it's such a good point because our home is our sanctuary for the most
Mhm.
part for most people, and the thought about living it and leaving it, especially if it's somewhere that you've been in for 20, 30, 40 years, can feel devastating and overwhelming. And I think that there's also this like other part of feeling shame or, around not being able to do the things that you used to be doing and not acknowledging or not wanting to acknowledge when maybe you aren't as mobile as you used to be, or you can't do all of the basic tasks like you used to, and you don't want to ask for help because you've been super independent your whole life. I think it's really hard to ask for help or accept help. And it's again, like to your point, it's really coming at it like I want to do what you want for as long as it's safe. And how can we make your home as safe as possible? If you're living in a suburb or, not New York City, do you have, a ground floor, you know, room to stay in? Like, do you have a bedroom and a bathroom that's accessible that you can get to? Are there rugs that are, potential tripping, things? How can you make the home as safe as possible so that the person is able to live as long as possible there? But yes, I think you're right that it's having these conversations early, like, okay, we're going to do our best, monetarily and otherwise to keep you here and as long as humanly possible. But, you know, I'm nervous or I'm scared, like putting it back on you to being like, I want to do what's best for you. And I want you to have, your autonomy and your say in how, your life goes. And so, can you be part of this planning process, whether we get to that point or not? How can you, the person who's aging, you know, be the one self-determining like what is happening? And that's also, acknowledging that maybe there are options that are not your ideal right now, but might be because exactly what you're saying, if there's a fall or something where you do either need, a rehabilitation center or a long-term stay or short-term stay, that you're thinking about what is in the vicinity, what is in your community that is available to you, and doing that research ahead of time. So are there good facilities in your area? Are you going to go check them out and do a visit just to have that knowledge? There are a lot of professionals who will help sort of take your financial circumstance, what your desires are, what your goals are, and present options to you so that you don't have to do all of that research by yourself, and sort of help you navigate that process. But I think, Jeannie, part of what you do is, making sure that people are financially savvy enough to
Right.
be having these conversations. It's very expensive to have, in-home healthcare aides. It's
Mhm.
also expensive to live in a very nice home. So, how are you setting yourself up for success in advance to make sure that
Right.
you have the resources you need when the time comes?
Yeah, and I had a situation. This guy, it wasn't end of life, but he was older. He was aging in place, if you will, in his home. But he had severe health issues because, I kid you not, he locked himself out on his second story balcony during it was a cold snap, and I guess yelled, but then decided I'll just jump over the railing. Guess what happened? He hurt himself pretty severely, his back and hip. He had to have major surgery. So on his way to come back in the home, he's like, oh, because he'd been doing like a series of therapy and everything. And they finally said, no, hip surgery is going to happen so that you can stand up straight. And he was like, oh, because he was literally bent after that event because he couldn't stand up straight. And his plan was, because he's on a multi-story townhome, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to just simply have somebody take me, my neighbors, they're going to take me home and then immediately take me to what? To my upstairs bedroom. They're just going to like carry me. And I said, no, I will be calling Adult Protective Services if I hear that happens. Number one. I said, number two, you need to contact your insurance to find out what they do have in terms of a supplement or allowing you to have somebody come in home in person to help take care of you, even for, a period of time. And I guess you're going to have to live on the main floor because you need to have access to your kitchen and to a bathroom. And it's going to be easier to get people in to make sure that you're taken care of. And if you have to be moved, the nurse has to be present. And he was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And I said, may I remind you, your best thinking got you over the railing instead of calling for help or having a spare key or, having your cell phone present, because he just did it to himself. It's like, and people I think forget that is that as you get older, you can have like just goofy mistakes. And I mean, even if he was healthy, I would not have said at 40, please jump over.
Well, I mean, I have a very personal story of this too, where it's like, these things happen where, my mom went out to get them. She, was in the car, went to go get the mail from the mailbox, thought the car was in park. It was not. She went out when she
Mm.
realized the car door slammed her. She fell back, it ran over her foot, and she broke all the things on the way down
Oh
and
no.
ended up, I was working in the city and got a call from a hospital that my mom had been in this freak car accident. And, in the ensuing months of, I had never been in this situation before.
Right.
And, the rehabilitation center that they sent her to from the hospital, I'm still like, I still feel ill that she was there. Like, and
Yeah.
that I did all that I could to figure out a way to get her out to a different place. And she's like, I can do anything for 6 weeks. But, you know, at that point, I didn't have, the resources that I had now or the understanding that there were people to help me. I was trying to do it all on my own. I was so
Mhm.
overwhelmed with figuring out the pets, the insurance, the mail, dealing with her life while dealing with mine, that like we hadn't had these conversations about, where she, what to do. And, she ended up recovering, but again, a silly mistake, ended up being months of rehabilitation. And yeah, so, I think that it's understanding that things happen and sort of, okay, how can we pivot? How can the family come together to make sure that the person is being supported, and that we have the resources we need to handle whatever comes up?
Exactly. Exactly. Because boy, when these events happen, we all have to like run and figure something else out
Well, and that's,
immediately.
yeah, and that's why planning in advance is the best way, and again, when I'm working with people after a death, when, if someone has not planned, if someone has not organized, if we don't have an idea of their digital assets and their bank accounts and their investment accounts and their crypto and their subscriptions, it really puts an extra level of grief and burden on families who are already dealing with the unimaginable. And it really makes me even more passionate about helping people get organized and planned in advance and making sure all these things are taken care of, because in that moment of something happens, how can you take as much off your plate as possible by already knowing, okay, we have her documents, we have what we need in place. For my mom, she was lucid enough to help us get into her accounts and the insurance and to help us navigate her digital life. If she had died, I would have been left totally unprepared. um,
Yeah.
and so I created, I sort of created my new career based on what I needed at that time or what information I would have wanted for my own family. um, because I can just see how, how much more overwhelming it would have been if I didn't have that information and I needed it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes when our family members get sick, that's when we start to see like the cracks in the armor, the links in the chain start to break open because I've seen it happen that, somebody has to get medically admitted in another state. And so maybe the loved one, usually the adult daughter, not always, sometimes it's the adult son, will go all that way to, make sure that their loved one makes it through the surgery. And then they find out that, oopsie, there's like 20 zillion other things they need to do, and they can't just get up and necessarily leave town because they're in person now. And now now the hospital and doctors need their support to get all this stuff done. And they're like, well, we can hire this, but you're going to have to deal with this and, like wheelchairs and medication and just, all kinds of stuff. And people are just like, what? I thought this was all done. And it's like, nah, that's happening in the hospital and they're getting out tomorrow. Congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects of caregiving that, we as a society don't recognize or understand. The emotional aspect of it, the logistical aspect of it, and, the time constraints or pressure to, yeah, all of a sudden have to drop things and be present with that person out of love and or responsibility. But also, like, how can you be setting yourself up for success if and when that happens, or that that's going to be your responsibility, because it is a lot. It's a lot for the person who's going through it, and it's a lot for the person who's caregiving. And there's, I'm sure, a level of grief and overwhelm on both parts, and sort of recognizing that dynamic exists.
Yeah, and I wanted to just share because you said, your new career started because of a terrible tragedy. Thankfully, it sounds like your mom's doing better now. But, the work that you do is so specific and so helpful. Like, I don't think people realize the level of anxiety and stress people have when they're like, here you go, this is all on you. And I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit more about not so much the day-to-day details, but like when you're like, hey, I can help you, I can show you how to get this done, or I can show you how this will be easier if we do it this way, how much of a godsend that can be in a moment where you're trying to figure it all out on your own and it's not working. I'm getting
Like,
some heads nodding on that one. They're like, I know, right?
well, yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like, how can you have a quarterback to help, the holistic plan that you need to create? So, really understanding, okay, I don't have a will. I should have a will. I know I should have a will, but I just haven't done it. As a lawyer, most of my friends are attorneys. And, I can't tell you how many people have gone as far as to get, the questionnaire from the attorney, and then it sits on their desk for 2 years. There's a
Oh,
mental block around dealing with a lot of this paperwork. I literally have a friend who asked to be connected to an attorney to get a trust done. He paid $5,000. It's been 9 months and he has not given any of his information to the attorney. And again, it's a lot of the times it's because something blocks us from completing it, whether it's fear around, making these sort of choices,
sure.
or it's a block around one specific question that holds up everything else. Like, a lot of it is, I have pets, I have a cat, I have a dog. I don't know who will take care of them. And they get stuck on that one thing, and then nothing else happens because they're just like, I don't know what to do with that. So a lot of what I'm doing is listening. I'm asking questions. I'm talking to people about, how can we come up with a solution? And I think a lot of what I do is providing resources. If someone needs to downsize, I am giving them a senior move manager who can come and help them organize and
Yeah.
decide what is important and what can be let go of. If they need home health aides, who are the providers that I trust to come in and help with that? If it's an attorney, I'm vetting attorneys that I think are on the same wavelength of, compassionate humans who are listening and asking the right questions to make sure that these things get done. And a lot of what I do is accountability, of making sure that, people know that these things are important, but they don't do them. It's always put to the last thing. So how can we make sure that we get those things done? And a lot of what I do is having these conversations within the families. I had a call last week with parents and two adult children about what are the parents' wishes? They hadn't updated their documents since one of the children was, under 12, and now he's an adult and he's going to be, the power of attorney now. But, these
Oh,
things hadn't
geez.
happened yet.
Yeah.
And so it needed someone else to step in and ask the right questions so that these conversations are actually being had, and making sure that they're actually being done. It's one thing to say, I have plenty of friends, even family, who have children under the age of 8 who don't have guardianship set up. And I'll ask, who will step in if you two are unable, or you one person are unable. I have lots of friends who are solo parenting. And they'll say, I've asked so and so to do it. Well, is it written down? Is it a legal document? And they'll say no. And so, talk is cheap. If that came down to it and something were to happen, do you have to go to court to get that? Or is there going to be a fight? So it really is a matter of seeing where people are in their life stage, whether it's solo aging, whether it's someone who's gone through widowhood or a divorce or having children who are, starting to accumulate wealth and have a house, that's not in a trust. How can you be smart about planning in advance at no matter what stage you are, knowing that it's not a set it or forget it situation? It's getting these documents in place, knowing that you're going to review them every 2 to 3 years, and you're going to make sure that, they are in a safe and secure place, that are, accessible to the people that you trust when they need it.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because this didn't actually happen to me, but I witnessed sort of, if you will, the afterwards of the decision. So there was a woman I worked with years ago. She was lovely, but she was considerably older, and she kept talking about her 6-year-old daughter, and we're all kind of looking at her like, really? And because she was like in her 60s, and we're like, wow, either she adopted or she she was just very lucky, I guess you could say. And she finally said, no, what happened is that my son and his wife were in a car accident. They died. So I refer to my granddaughter as our daughter because it makes it easier for her. And we were all just like floored. And she's like, I'm young, I'm hip, I'm raising another generation. I'm happy to do it. And I was like, thank God they actually wrote. And she said, her and her husband were the first ones up if anything were to happen to her son and daughter-in-law, which the worst thing did happen. And thankfully, that was prepared and taken care of, because I will tell you the level of grief that woman experienced losing her son and having to bury her daughter-in-law while holding on to very young grandchildren was enormous for her. But she
Oh
was
my gosh.
utterly grateful that at least the ball had gotten started, and that she was like, I'm going to be a mom again. And that was kind of the only joy she was really able to take from a situation that was life changing for everyone. But I just always applaud that.
No, it's such a good point. I had a situation, or a conversation with my niece. I call her my niece. She's really my cousin, but she's 7 years old. And we were playing, and it was just me and her. And she asked me like what my biggest fear was, and I sort of racked my brain because I didn't want to be too dark or too heavy about it. And so I said something like, it's a snake. I don't like snakes.
Hmm.
And I was like, what is your greatest fear? And she's like, that something happens to my parents. Like, what would
Hmm.
happen to me? And I, like, my heart broke.
Hmm.
Um, Also knowing that my adult cousins don't have a will in place. And despite the fact that I'm in this field and send them little reminders, there's always something that stops people from planning, even though that they know that it's important. Um, and it really takes a lot of education, having conversations like this to
Yeah.
remind people that, it's never the opportune moment to be doing this, but it doesn't have to be done in a day. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Hmm.
These sort of things aren't done in a day. Like I
Yeah.
created an organizer of your important information, all the things that typically live in your head that would be best on paper,
Oh, I love that you just shared that. All the things that live in your head that would be best on paper. Oh my gosh, people need that.
Yeah, but it's super overwhelming to people because it's a lot of information. I've split it into chapters like, your personal information, your medical information, your home information, like who has keys to my apartment? Who's the super, because I live in an apartment building, or, who are the maintenance people, all this stuff. And so I've created this document, but people don't, and it's downloaded by so many people, but, really people don't fill it out because they don't have time. But I always suggest that people just take one chapter in 1 week and do 20 minutes and just start gathering your information. It doesn't have to all be done at once. It just needs to be done over time. So it's sort of
Mm.
progress over perfection in getting anything organized, whether it's just organizing your insurance information and if you have a life insurance policy, like where are all these things living, and making sure that you're getting it organized, but not feeling the pressure that like, oh my God, I have all this to do. I have to do it all at once. No, you just need to do a little bit, just a little bit
Yeah.
at a time.
So we actually have a great question in here. It's by Sophia. She says, "Where can one get the organizer?" So I'm guessing like you have inspired, like there's like a book they can like, or a PDF or something. So oh,
Yeah,
can we make sure everyone's on mute? That's like Stacy and Michelle. I know sometimes people are pretty busy, but if I would really appreciate it. Go ahead, Marnie.
yeah, it's on my website. I can either send it in a follow-up, or actually like I have a slide at the end of like where to
Awesome.
find me, where you're welcome to like look at it. I also have a bunch of free offerings on my website. So there's like an important documents checklist. So it's sort of like what are the important documents to be thinking about that you can gather in advance. Into your secure spot. And so that's free. And I also have some like legacy project ideas because I really love how do you want to be remembered, and sort of taking charge of that in advance. So
Oh, I love that idea. I love that. Yeah, we'll definitely do that at the end, but I did have one at least more question for
sure.
you. And that is, a lot of times you talked about the emotional and logistic burdens. Can you talk about how it really helps people to help them heal if you've got somebody like you, a death doula, who's very much expert about end of life issues and what to do, even in an emergency?
Yeah, I mean it really does take the stress out of the family because yeah, it's sort of like, where do I even begin? Do I need to, here's a personal example. So I was, someone in my apartment building reached out to the building, there's a group email. And it was like, does anyone have an extra wheelchair that we can borrow? And so I wrote back, I don't have a wheelchair, but here is a home medical company that can get you one sort of ASAP.
Yeah.
Um, and so, she said, they got her one within 3 hours. And so I said, I do this. Like, if you need anything, just let me know. 2 weeks later, she emailed me, hey, my husband took a fall. He's in the hospital. We need a home health care aide. I said, here are 3 companies. I'm going to make personal introductions. She had one as soon as she was home, someone in the home. And
Nice.
then a few weeks later, I was just in the laundry room doing laundry at a random time. And there was a woman down there that I hadn't met. I introduced myself, and she said that she was the daughter of this couple. And I said, oh, I'm Marnie. She's like, oh my gosh, you're Marnie. And we started talking. We spent 30 minutes talking about the situation, and basically that her father was now in hospice. And I said, well, one thing that you can think about, is, making sure that, the funeral, or, who you want to come pick up him when the time comes. It's one less thing that you're going to have to worry about in that moment. And I put her in touch with, a funeral home that, I find to be caring and compassionate. And when the time came, they already had that lined up, and it was one less thing on their mind. So it's sort of, how can we be of assistance and sort of guide people, knowing that, like, I didn't know any of these things existed before I got into the space. And now I feel very fortunate that when people come to me and ask me, I know that there are people out there to help. And sort of, I can see in real time, I worked with a solo ager, a man in his 60s who had a horrible neurological thing. He didn't have
Mm.
family who was involved. It was his best friend. And, this man hired me because he didn't want his best friend to have to burden everything. And,
Smart.
these men had been best friends, since they were 15. Like it was,
Wow.
and so I would meet with both of them and we would talk about things. But, I sort of helped with all of the logistics and then also helped be the point person for the funeral so that he didn't have to deal with it when his friend died. And, it's months later. And I'll get texts just, saying like, I was thinking about you from the best friend. Like I was invited to a pizza party of his closest friends, months after, just to have a remembrance of him because they recognized that they were like, you're part of our community now, part of my friend group. And I still,
Wow.
this happened in September. I'm still getting messages from them, because I was there in that moment to take the burden off the friend group so that they could just be in grief with each other. So I can see in real time how having someone there kind of to to say I'm here to do the heavy lifting so that you don't have to can be super valuable.
Oh, I love this. I love that. So I just got to ask you, what helps keep you going? Because grief can be very heavy, even if you're a professional, you kind of know what needs to happen. It's, you're not the wedding planner. It's not all joy. This is real work. And like, what keeps you going?
I mean, I can see in real time how I'm making people's lives lighter. But it's really not easy work. And like I'll say I'm not in Brooklyn right now. I'm in upstate New York. I'm being a backup caregiver for my 102-year-old grandmother for the month. And watching her decline is super painful. And so I can see how, like, even with all of my experience, even with all of this knowledge and education, I can feel the heaviness of what caregiving feels like and watching someone die feels like from this side. And knowing that also like informs how I show up for other people. Like my grandmother's normal caregivers are such a godsend to
Yeah.
our family. And I'm so grateful for them because it allows her to age in place. But for me, as someone, who does it sort of on the side to help her is just like I'm so grateful that I can do this with others and I'm so grateful to have support within my own family for that grief that I am feeling in anticipation of her passing. So it's sort of like a full circle. Like I know that we need to accept help and I know that I'm able to give help.
Yeah. Yeah, Joe made a good point. It takes a village. So I love that. I want to just pause now and say, does anyone have any questions or comments for Marnie? Now we can all just talk amongst ourselves. It's totally fine now.
I do.
Yeah, go
Yes.
ahead, Carolyn.
First of all, this is two-part. I want to give an endorsement to Marnie, who I've known for at least a couple of years. And I am dealing with my mom in Arizona, and she is definitely going downhill, and we're prepared. But just, and I know all these things, that there's nothing that was said today that we don't already have in place, but just the comfort, and I'm sure you can all see the kind of person that she is, of knowing that you have a Marnie there, I think is just priceless. That's for starters. And Jeannie, you sound wonderful. I don't know you, but you sound
Thanks.
great as well. And I just want to say it's interesting. So I just came back from Arizona recently. Like I said, everything's in place. My mother, she already told me which funeral home is the cheapest, the cremation, don't get the extra. They only cost more if you're over 300 pounds. I'm like, oh, well, you're nowhere near there. So all of that is in place. Um, but what I found was really interesting, and I am sort of involved on her proxy on every levels, is she stuck around a little longer when I thought she was going to like check out a couple of weeks ago because she realized she hadn't done her taxes. Okay. She doesn't want to leave that as an issue. And doing the taxes with her, papers, not digital stuff all over, was really very helpful because you really saw every single little piece of what goes on. And I have to say, I was just so relieved to be able to do that. That was all part of this, you know?
Yeah, I love that. I love
I mean,
that.
and that was just coincidence and timing. But
Yeah.
hearing her say that she needed to do her taxes was the biggest relief for us to even hear those words because it didn't sound like that's how it was going to go. And she had a plan. That's all I can tell you.
I
Can
yeah.
I can I chime in on that, Carolyn? What you said is so on point. I run a bookkeeping firm called Trotter Bookkeeping here in Florida. And by running through this so many times with clients, because we get into those details, we ended up putting together a service package for our active clients. So we're not end of life, we're not death doulas, we're not at that place, but we're the step after the attorney. And so we're packaging that information. But what we ended up doing was facilitating these conversations because so many people were so afraid of talking about it or so uncomfortable with it that we facilitate it. So it brings me so much joy to talk with you and hear the passion and hear the real world. And also, Marnie, I definitely want to get with you afterwards because we expanded out of Florida. We've got clientele. I need death doulas. I need great people in end of life because you figure we're the paperwork people, we're the facilitators after they write the will. There's a long time between when we say what we want versus when the rubber meets the road, and we need people like so I'll drop information in the chat here so you can grab it from me as well, Jeannie, for that. But to have the opportunity to dig into those details with a loved one and really understand the context and the relationships and that fine granular thinking, it's so helpful in so many ways. And yet how many of us never do that because we're across the country, we're across the globe, we're somewhere else. And those tiny little meaningful things that are inconsequential mean everything in the moment. So thank you, Jeannie, for this. Thank you, Marnie, for putting this together. And you're such a gift. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy. Nancy, I know you're on mute, but you can get off. You had a question.
And excuse my phone ringing. My son just called from Florida, said, "Don't freak out, I'm in the emergency room." I said, "What happened?" He goes, "I've probably got pneumonia." And I didn't say, "I told you last week to go." No, I told you so. But thank you, Marnie and Jeannie. Oh my gosh. I have a quick question, just because my husband just entered hospice. And so one of the things they have is a respite for 5 days for caregivers. I've been doing it for a couple of years. And people, I'm hearing some things and I want to get your opinion. So they said, I've heard saying, don't put him in the respite because he has to go for 5 days there. They pick him up and take him back. But I'm sitting there going, yes, but I need to have a break. And so I'm sitting there weighing the pros and the cons about, whether to do it or not. And so what is your feedback? And I know Jeannie's got her own opinion too, but I don't think they would, especially if I go and see a place that he could potentially be staying at. What are some of your suggestions about taking advantage of that respite care?
I mean, I think it's really important for you to acknowledge what you need in this moment, just as much as your husband. And you can only be a support if you have enough to give. And so if you feel like it's time, I think that you need to be able to give yourself permission to have that time and space. So whether that's if you don't want to move them into a place, is there an option for having respite care in your home? And so that you go and, take a little mini vacay from your home and, or is it, checking out local areas where you see the Google reviews and it's a good place and that. So where are you going to get the best sleep? Where are you going to feel the most supported? Making sure that he has the care that he needs, but also giving yourself that space. I give you.
And I agree, Marnie. And I mean, pretty much, it's like $4,500 that I have to pay out of pocket to have in-home care to do this, or is hospice is going to cover the cost. So I think going and checking out a place, and I don't want to have that guilt feeling. Well, it's going to make him go down even faster. And I'm suddenly going, he has Lewy body dementia and he's continually declining. So.
Yeah, I feel like this is always the thing, as somebody who had to witness both her parents kind of just deteriorate, that is the reminder too, that the fact that they digress, they start to go downhill is expected and normal. we don't celebrate it, but it is that awareness of understanding that you're looking at a disease, not them. And
Mhm.
I love the use of respite because I feel like if that just gives you a moment of reprieve, of not having to think about death and dying and your guilt and whatever else, then you're doing something that you absolutely need, because a lot of times caregivers are expected to just absorb everything, and that's not okay.
No, I don't want to be in the 40% that dies before the person they're caring for. I want to be in the 60% club.
There you go. I love that, Nancy. I'm going to the 60% club. That's brilliant. Thank you for that. Sophia, would you like to ask your question?
Just really quickly, thank you for having this. I wanted to see what your opinions were on talking to like family members who are in denial in terms of where their parents are in terms of having dementia, and trying to have like normal conversations with someone who has dementia, and having the mindset that they can continue to have these rational conversations when the person is not capable of that. So if there's any feedback on that, and just like how do you make decisions, and how do you like because I'm finding like I'm the bearer of the bad news,
Yeah.
and it's really heartbreaking because we all know what the diagnosis is. So if there's any feedback, I would sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, Marnie, would you like to take this?
Have you heard of the organization Caring Kind? It is
No.
it is solely based on dementia. Sometimes, sort of like early to mid stage dementia. So like when things are starting to decline, but they have they have support groups, they have a lot of education. So it could be something to sort of suggest, hey, like, I think, whether you feel like we're there or not, maybe it's important for you and me to start educating ourselves, maybe sort of taking off the weight of like, we need to figure this out right now. You have to get on board, somewhat of like a gentle push, sort of like, maybe if someone else is talking about, here are the symptoms, here's what's going on, here's the progression, and it's hearing it from someone else and not you, sometimes it gets absorbed in a way that if it's coming from a family member, it might not be taken as such for whatever reason. Family dynamics are super complicated, especially in situations like this. And so I think, how can you take it sort of off your plate by giving other options for them to hear things that they need to hear in a different way?
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, this has just been my experience dealing with families, is that if you cannot personally go to the doctor's appointment for your aging loved one, then please email them, send them any videos or text messages, etc., whatever, of the aging loved one and what you're seeing and observing. Because what I have noticed is that a lot of times family members know there's a problem, but they don't want to go and get the official diagnosis. They want to, I don't know, do their own, if you will, song and dance. So my experience is, get the confirmation, get the diagnosis. The aging loved one doesn't have to like it or agree, and that's not even really the point. The point is that somebody from the medical team has to step in and say, this is my concern, this is what it is. Let's get them maybe the officially tested, and then you do that. Once you have official diagnosis, then legally, and I know Marnie, you can speak on this much more in depth, you have to enact some type of plan, whether it's a will or, estate plan, medical power of attorney, all that jazz. But I will just simply say my life experience has taught me that when it came to my mother's health, I had a family member that intentionally delayed diagnosis and then ripped her off. So I encourage people to get to the doctor right away and get the diagnosis to confirm what needs to happen, which is, are they ill or not? And if so, what is it? Let's get a diagnosis. Let's figure this out. So thank you so much, Christy, for that wonderful little note here. I so appreciate it. Oh, yes. How to get a hold of Marnie if you need her. And I'm going to drop my link in here. I run a caregiver conference. I do that in November. Actually, Marnie was one of my guest speakers this last year. And this last caregiver conference was all about what? Taking care of yourself as a caregiver, because God knows no one else is going to do it for you. And we just need to get the help and support where we still can. And then I will just say, lastly, I'm going to be doing another one this year, and I'm very, very excited. So,
Yeah, I mean, I listened to a lot of the different presentations you gave last year in your caregiver conference, and I thought it was such a wealth of information and so important. So I thank you for putting that on. And also, if you don't write this down, like no worries at all. I'll be sending everyone sort of a follow-up email. So no worries. Lastly, I'm actually hosting a 3-part Getting Your Digital Life and Afterlife organized series. It actually starts tomorrow. If you have any interests, feel free to let me know. There's a lot of information about and practical about how to get things organized. As you can tell, I find this very important to be, I'm making my parents do it. So
making your parents do it. I love that. Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to thank everyone for being here. If you want to save the chat, Zoom changed it. You just go up to where the 3 dots are in the chat, and then you just hit click save, and you'll get it when you jump out of this. No worries. Thank you, Carolyn. What I'm going to do is send a follow-up email, and we will send you the recording, so you will have that. You'll have the recording until Monday, I think. Yeah, Sunday night it'll change. Just because, free events are wonderful, but, got to eventually see it, and then we got to move on. There's more happening. So I absolutely thank all of you for coming. This is a very important topic, but it's not always an easy topic. But thank goodness for somebody like Marnie, who's an absolute expert. So
thank you so much, and for all of the thoughtful questions. They're really important.
Thank
So
you, ladies. Thank you for caring.
Thank you.
yes, you're welcome. I'm just hanging on because I know we've got a few more people getting off, and I'm going to end the recording.